When you first start learning to fly in Australia, there's 3 main licence paths you choose from: the RPC, the RPL, and the PPL. Each licence type has its own pros and cons, but just because you're flying under one licence doesn't mean you're locked into that group forever. For me, I started flying with an RA-Aus issued RPC. Firstly, to save some cash on cheap aircraft rates, and secondly, I had great instructor availability within the RA-Aus bracket. But after a year of flying and enjoying adventures with my RPC and this trusty little Technam, I was ready to take the step up into something a bit bigger, something that could fit an extra passenger in, have room for an extra bag or two, and have the range for some good cross-country touring. So the next logical step for me was to upgrade to the RPL. Whilst the process of converting from an RPC to an RPL on paper might seem a little bit tedious, the actual process was a lot simpler than I thought. So in this video, I'll walk you through the journey I took to go from an RA-Aus issued RPC to a CASA issued RPL in Australia, and all the steps I took along the way, and hopefully I can share some bits of advice that might help anyone else who's thinking of doing the same. Now, some of you might be wondering, why not just go straight for the PPL instead? It offers international recognition, access to a wider range of endorsements and ratings, and opens up more opportunities. But for me, I don't need those extra privileges just yet. And to be honest, I wasn't quite ready to tackle the full PPL exam. And from a more practical, maybe a little more impatient perspective, the RPL allows me to start flying the types of planes I wanted to sooner, without the extra commitment right away. Alright, so let's dive into all the steps you need to take to go from an RPC to an RPL. Experience-wise, you'll want to ensure you've passed all your RPC exams and completed your flight reviews. I'd also recommend completing your NAV endorsement if you haven't done so already, and make sure all your hours are logged away in your logbook. For the CASA conversion to the base RPL, you need at least 25 hours of total flying time, a minimum of 20 hours of dual instruction, and 5 hours logged as pilot in command. If you're aiming to add the NAV endorsement to your RPL, you'll also need to have demonstrated at least 1 hour of dual NAV instruction and 5 hours of solo navigation time. The upside of doing your NAV training under the RPC is that you typically benefit from the lower cost associated with renting out light sport aircraft, but this really depends on your access, your budget, and your flying goals. It's not mandatory to add the NAV endorsement. You can always convert an RPC to an RPL without it. Personally, I already had the rating, so I'll walk you through the process with that included. Next up is your CASA ARN, your aviation reference number. If you've been flying under RA-Aus, you'll be familiar with your membership number. The ARN works similarly, but is specific to CASA, and you'll need it to tie all your licenses, endorsements, and applications to your identity within the CASA system. If you don't already have an ARN, you need to hop onto the CASA website and register for one. It's a very straightforward process and something you'll need for all the steps going forward, so it's a good idea to get this sorted early on. Next up is your ASIC. Even if you don't plan on flying into security-controlled airports, CASA still requires anyone applying for an RPL or PPL to hold an active ASIC, an Aviation Security Identification Card. It's a bit of a formality, but unfortunately, it's mandatory. There's a few providers in Australia where you can apply for an ASIC. I personally went through Aviation ID. The process there was pretty straightforward. Fill out their form online, submit your passport quality photo and other details off, and they'll kick off a background check in the process. At some point in time, they'll organise a delegate in your area who will contact you to verify your identity documents in person, and then it's just a matter of waiting. Now, I've heard some people have had to wait months to get their ASIC processed. For me, it took around 6 weeks from start to finish. Next is the medical requirement, which is a bit different from the RA-Aus system. Under RA-Aus, as long as you hold a current driver's license, you're typically considered medically fit to fly. But for CASA, you'll need to obtain one of the various class ratings of medical certificates. Full Class 1 or 2 medicals require being examined by a CASA-designated medical examiner, which can be a bit more complex to obtain, but comes with greater privileges. The basic Class 2 is what I opted for. It's less restrictive and much easier to obtain than the full Class 1 or Class 2. You simply need to print out a form, which is similar to what's required for a commercial vehicle operator's license, take it to your GP and complete the form with them. You then submit the form back to CASA through the My CASA portal for approval, and with this rating, I'd still be eligible for day VFR under 10,000 feet, whilst carrying up to a maximum of 5 passengers, but with the restriction that there is no use of flight activity endorsements such as aerobatic or low-level flying. Additionally, there's also the Ramp C or the Class 5 Self-Medical Declaration, which are a little more lenient. However, these particular medicals come with very similar restrictions to RA-Aus, which imposes a maximum of 2 passengers on board. So for me, the basic Class 2 gave me what I needed without the hassle of a more intensive medical exam. And I think that's a good option for most RPL holders, unless of course you need those extra privileges that come with a full Class 1 or Class 2. Another key CASA requirement is holding an English language proficiency certificate. This ensures your radio communication is clear with no lisp or accent or any other issues that could cause a confusion over the airways. In aviation, clear communication is critical, especially when talking to ATC, so CASA takes this very seriously. Finding someone to conduct this test can be a little tricky. I recommend reaching out to a local flight school to see if they offer the test on site or if they have access to a CASA delegate who can perform it. In my case, I found the head of operations at a flight school was able to conduct the test for me. There's different levels of the test that can be conducted. At the flight school I went to, they were able to do a level 6 test, which I highly recommend if you can. The level 6 test is a lifelong rating that never expires, so it's a one-time requirement. The test itself is pretty straightforward. First, you'll just have a simple conversation with the examiner in plain English. I talked about a recent holiday I went on, and then you'll listen to some pre-recorded audio clips between a pilot and ATC, and you'll be asked to describe what's happening in the scenarios and suggest how the communication could have been clearer. And finally, you might run through some common knowledge items like pronouncing the phonetic alphabet correctly and basic ATC readback items. It's not that difficult, but it's important to demonstrate that you can communicate effectively and understand the standard aviation phrases. Alright, if you've made it this far, you're almost there. The second last step is handling the CASA paperwork. This is where you pull everything together to officially apply for your RPL. First, if you're new to the CASA portal, you'll first need to download Form 61-9 PIC to submit a passport quality photo for CASA to keep in their system. This is a requirement for your official CASA records and is your photo identity basically in their portal. Next up, you'll need to get access to Form 61-1 RTX. This is the actual application form for your RPL and any associated endorsements through the recognition of your RPC. As you work through this form, you'll be asked to fill out your personal details, confirm that you've got an active ASIC, that you've done your English proficiency check, and answer all the usual questions about criminal records, revoked licenses, and hopefully you'll be ticking no to all of these. You then need to input all of your logged flight hours from your logbook. If you hold the flight radio endorsement, make sure to check that box, and if you're adding the nav endorsement, you'll need to fill in the relevant cross-country hours you've accumulated as well. If you have any specific design feature endorsements, you can nominate those here too. And along with this form, you'll need to attach certified copies of a few key documents, most notably your ASIC, your current RPC certificate, all the pages from your logbook, your English language proficiency assessment, and your passport quality photo, along with Form 61-9 PIC. To get these documents certified, I simply photocopied them, took the originals along with the copies to my local pharmacy and had them certified by a local pharmacist. CASA has a full list of people who can certify your documents on their website, so you can easily find someone near you. Now, if you happen to have completed any additional endorsements outside of the RA-Aus bracket, for example, a controlled airspace or aerodrome ratings, you'll also need to download Form 61-1 RE. But if navigation training and flight radio ratings were all done under RA-Aus and that's the only thing you're carrying forward, you can skip this form completely and keep moving ahead. Once you've got everything together and completed the payment details on the bottom of the form, all you have to do is put everything as an attachment and email it off to applications@casa.gov.au and then sit back and wait. Now, much like getting an ASIC, there is some waiting time here. The processing time depends on the current backlog of work for CASA. But for me, it took about a month to go from submission to being notified that I was officially the holder of an RPL. Technically, at this point, yes, you now hold an RPL, but it's not active until you complete a flight review with a qualified instructor. This flight review is very similar to the biannual flight reviews you do and be familiar with under the RA-Aus system. Essentially, you need to go and show your instructor that you can demonstrate all of the necessary skills and knowledge outlined in the Manual of Standards, and once you've signed off, you're good to go. The flight school that I went through, they had a fleet of Piper Warriors and Archers. So I took my time studying the pilot's operating handbook back to front, I went through the club's checklists, I looked up other people's checklists and processes online, and I watched a ton of videos of people flying these aircraft. But ultimately, you need to book in the time and get in the seat to learn how to fly one of these aircraft. So I booked in for a familiarization flight in a Warrior 2. On the first flight, we went out, we practiced circuits, stalls, forced landings and steep turns, and ultimately the biggest challenge for me wasn't the maneuvers or the difference in the aircraft systems, it was simply just the added weight compared to the Technam and switching from a control stick to a yoke. The range of motion of the yoke requires much bigger input, and honestly, I thought I might need to do a few more bicep curls just to hold it off during landing. My second flight was supposed to continue from where we left off, but with weather, work, and well, life getting in the way, this took a bit longer to get around to. And in that time, the instructor that I was flying with landed a job with Qantas, lucky guy, so I ended up with a new instructor. And by the time I got back around to it, he decided that we may as well do the full flight review now and see what gaps there were in my skills. Now, I thought I flew pretty rough that day, but he was happy with everything that he saw and he signed me off on the spot. Now, a few $100 later, and after the instructor updating my CASA portal, my RPL was now fully activated and ready for use. Now, don't get me wrong, I was thrilled to hit this milestone. But the reality is, even though I passed the check ride and I had an active RPL, I didn't actually feel completely confident flying the Pipers yet. And making things a bit trickier, the flight school that I was training with were no longer operating on Sundays, and I had to figure out where to go from there. Most of my flying is being done on weekends. So luckily for me, I found a local club nearby with a fleet of Cessna 172s and 152s. They also had an independent instructor there as well. So I booked some time with him and I asked him to put me through my absolute paces, just like going back to my first flights in the Technam. Now, over the next few weeks, we practiced every kind of stall imaginable. We flew in winds gusting up to 35 knots. We tackled maximum crosswinds, you name it, we did it. And this is exactly what I needed to regain my confidence and really get a feel for the heavier aircraft. And after all that, I am much more comfortable flying now. The Cessna 172 for me really does just feel like a bigger, maybe more docile version of the Technam. The bonus of some bigger fuel tanks for longer flights, some more space to bring family and friends along for the journey, and extra space in the back to throw an extra bag or two in. So that, in a nutshell, is my journey from an RA-Aus issued RPC through to a CASA issued RPL. If you're on the same path or thinking about upgrading, feel free to drop any of your questions in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.